Caravella Coffee Talks are back, a space created to speak with thought leaders, to exchange knowledge, and share perspectives.
In these talks, the relationship building team invites you to attend sessions with female leaders in the industry.
We will hear about their aha moments, life lessons, breakthroughs, and how we can make coffee better together.
Over the years, we have seen how the representation of women in the industry has gained traction and has flourished. Join us for some inspiration.
Hello, my name is Marisabel Vasquez, Marketing Manager at Caravella.
Hi, my name is Ana Sofia Narvaez, Relationship Builder at Caravella.
We want to welcome you to our third episode of Caravella Coffee Talks, Women Make Coffee Better.
In today's conversation, you'll hear from our former relationship builder, Salomé Puentes, and Jaime Isetts, from United States, sourcing consultant for Square Mile Coffee.
They speak about how Jaime became a green coffee consultant, a journey that started somehow working with small-scale farmers in Spain, learning new languages like Spanish and Portuguese. They dive into the role of a green coffee buyer, power dynamics, transparency, traceability, standards, and expectations when establishing relationships with producers. The power to change narratives whilst creating positive change for all parties in the supply chain.
We hope that you enjoyed this conversation.
So my name is Jaime Isetts. I'm an independent coffee consultant, and my biggest sort of role right now that takes up the most of my time is that I'm the buyer for Square Mile Coffee in London. But in my career, I've worked as a green buyer for other roasteries, but I've also worked a bit in importing. Kind of worn a lot of different hats and learned a lot of different zones in our supply chain. So really happy to be here.
That's awesome. We are thrilled to have you here because, I've known you for a while, and I think that your experience is something other people in the industry should learn from. And we are thankful that you're coming to this space to share all of the learnings that you have had throughout the years. So why don't you provide some context? How did you start in coffee? How did you fall in love with coffee? You're here, right?
Yeah, so my coffee journey started when I was in university. So I was studying economics and biology and also Portuguese. And so I always like to tell people, in retrospect, I don't know what else I would have done with that besides become a coffee buyer. But, those were just the things that I was interested in. And I also, really had a passion for grassroots activism. I've always really liked art and food. And, so I had a lot of interest, and I just wasn't really sure, what I could do that would marry all of those things together. So after school, I traveled around and did a program called WOOF, which is an organic farm work exchange program, where you basically work on a farm. You can do it all over the world, and you receive your food and your, all your lodging and stuff in exchange for your work, because essentially you're not like a skilled, they're kind of babysitting you in a way if you're not a skilled worker. Through that, I learned Spanish. I, worked on my Portuguese some, and I kind of got exposed to, in particular, when I was living in Brazil, to really like small scale farming, and just sort of like the types of places where that occurs, and kind of the livelihood of the people who are growing those things. And I kind of realized at that point, like, I really like being part of this environment, but at the same time, I miss my own cultural context growing up in the US. So I read an article about a green buyer who I know now. And I was like, I'm going to do that. So when I came back to the US, I kind of like made that my mission. And I worked as a production roaster, or a production assistant for a roastery for a very short amount of time. And I was pretty quickly like, I want to learn faster. Then I started as a trading assistant at Inter-American, which is a part of the Neumann Group, which is a multinational coffee company. And that was kind of where I learned the basics of how the supply chain works, and, what the status quo is. And then from there, I ended up going to work for one of my clients, a company called Merit Coffee, where I was the green buyer for the last 6 years.
Wow, that's such a long time. And that's impressive because usually when we talk about how we got into coffee, we got from other environments and not specifically into the specialty coffee industry through a bigger company. It's usually from small companies that then we grow into learning the scope and the point of view of a bigger player in the industry. So coming from that unexpected background and stepping from green coffee business to roasters and coffee shops, what do you think that has taught you?
Oh, I mean, it was hugely helpful. I think, and you would probably agree with me that in the specialty space, most buyers move in the opposite direction. Like they start as a barista, and then maybe they become a roaster, and then they become a green buyer, and then maybe later in their career, they go work for an importer or an export company, at least on this side of the supply chain. But having kind of going in that opposite direction was, oh my God, it was so helpful because, like I said, it kind of gave me an idea of, you know, at least what the norms were, whether I agreed with them or not, and sort of how, what types of expectations different people in the chain would have, and like what their challenges were. So it just sort of like gave me like I could see, like, do you know that game Mousetrap? I think maybe not. It's like in the US we have this, it's like a kid's game, like a board game, and it's called Mousetrap, and you set up all of these different structures, and it's basically like a Rube Goldberg machine. Like at a certain point you like drop a marble and it like goes through all the different pieces and like they all come together. Yeah. So like that was like, rather than just getting to see one piece of the puzzle, I kind of got to see the bigger picture. And that was like super, super helpful when I, you know, came down to the smaller context of just working for one roaster. Like, I knew what I needed to do to like make things work faster, to make things easier for the people I was working with. And just like, it gave me a different kind of context that I think makes me a good partner.
That's great. That's very important because not understanding how the industry works, whether we like it or not, only makes it harder to find a way for it to work the way we want it to work. That's very, very interesting. So, through all of this learning and experiencing and all of this transition in your life, what was your aha moment in coffee? Like, oh, I understand this.
Well, so about 3 or 4 years ago, I went to visit a geisha farm in Panama, and it's a lovely farm. It's called Finca Debra, and it's not just that it's, you know, a geisha farm and they do all these interesting processes and stuff, but it's also like fully biodynamic. They do really incredible soil treatments and stuff. But what I realized was that it's not that that coffee was particularly expensive. It's that truly all other coffee should be valued at that same price, or like closer to that. Just because, I mean, you know, realizing like Panama is essentially a dollarized economy with all of the same like logistical challenges that many other Latin American countries face. And also the level of attention to detail and sophistication of that farm, you know, of course it was because that producer had more resources, but also like it was, you know, I just realized like, oh, if I want to see, you know, the people that are growing coffee, like, you know, being in this kind of environment and putting this type of attention to it, then like that's how much it costs. You know what I mean? And so and so I realized like, okay, like I need to do what I can on my side to add value to the customer experience so that we can move towards that, you know, that price point that makes things more sustainable.
Yeah. So, with this experience and having the experience that you have, because you have, as a green coffee buyer, you have been visiting producers, visiting origin, and then as a green coffee buyer, you have also explored the roasteries, the coffee shops, and now as a consultant, you help strengthening and structuring a green coffee department. How do you think the industry is handling the connection between origin and destination? Like, what are your comments on how this connection born and how are we handling to be fruitful?
Yeah. I think that, you know, we've obviously come a long way, but there's still so much that gets lost in translation. Like, I'd really like to, I've been thinking a lot about how I'd like to find a way for producers and different people along the chain to have their tone and sort of their priorities reflected a little bit more in the marketing that goes to the end user, or at least
Yeah.
I think that, you know, storytelling in coffee has come a long way, and people have
Yeah.
a lot more appetite for what they want to know and what can be used in a way that doesn't just bog the customer down with information, but also, like, I'd like to introduce some kind of something that can reflect more, you know, how the producer wants to speak about themselves,
Yeah.
while still, it's a real challenge, and I don't have the answer right now because, you know, like, when you are representing one particular coffee brand, you know, you have to keep a unified tone in that as well. So I think
Yeah.
it's going to be an interesting balance figuring out how that can be done, and it's really what I want to be working on in the next couple of years.
Yes, it is definitely something that the industry has been talking about a lot. And we have seen a lot of improvement opportunities on that area. So we are curious to see how people like you, that are the leaders of the generation, the next generation of specialty coffee, are going to bring ideas to the table to be able to preserve the identity of the brand that's showcasing the coffee, but to also be able to showcase the identity of the producer and how the producers would like that coffee to be presented as well, because it's also part of their effort and as a result of their work, sort
Yeah,
of thing.
absolutely.
So, yeah, that's going to be very interesting to see in the industry because we tend to see a very similar narrative through the industry. So bringing something that has more soul, sort of thing, it's going to be a game changer, I think, and it will also allow, in my personal opinion, that the end customer will, at least in a small percentage, try to get closer to the producer or understand the producer reality or become loyal to a certain producer.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, you know, it was interesting. I was talking to somebody about this today. Uh, and actually, so a lot of times, especially when I'm working with with a group that I'm pretty new to, I usually, like, maybe, especially if I don't have like a personal relationship with them, like, I kind of stay away from, like, you know, talking about them as a person, or like talking about, you know, their being a little bit more touchy feely, and I'll just focus on, you know, some of the more technical stuff. Um, and then you know, as I like, after I've been working with someone for like 4 or 5 years, I feel a little bit more licensed to be like, oh yeah, she likes, because I have that personal relationship with them. But,
Yeah,
you know, someone pointed out to me today that like, sometimes, you know, maybe the producer or the group at origin that's producing or supplying the coffee, maybe they want to, you know, even if I am not, I don't have that kind of relationship with them, maybe they want to convey a little bit more of that soul and a little bit more of that personal touch. And
yeah,
I think I am a little conservative when it comes to doing that, because I don't want to overstep my bounds, and I don't want to, like, you know, tell somebody else's personal story in the wrong way. But I think, I don't know, I think there's really some room for development with that. Like, for example, my successor at Merit, my friend Christian Rotzko, he's really, really good at like finding those stories of place and like finding a way to like take a little bit of a risk with it to show something cool about the place without like co-opting it,
Yeah.
And he just did a cool project with some coffee that they purchased from Rwanda, and I was like, this is so cool. Like I would have been scared to do this, but you did this in a way that I feel like really
Yeah.
honors the place and is cool and respectful. So I think I have some room to grow with that too.
Yeah, I think that we all do because there's always this line, especially with different cultures, and how much do you share and how much is right to share. Because sometimes, for example, all over Latin America and even from different countries, people will share and bring more information and they will be happy to share all of this. But then you go to some other countries and producers are more reserved, so they don't like to talk as much about different things or their family or the uniqueness of the coffee just because of culture. So understanding that and portraying it is it's tricky, really tricky. In your general experience in the industry, what do you think is an overlooked issue or aspect in the coffee industry, and what was your journey to like eye-opening journey that you said like okay we're overlooking this and it's very important.
Yeah, I think especially in the niche that I've been in for the past, 6 years or so, like mostly with Merit,
Mhm.
really focusing on like top quality kind of like boutique specialty. Um, I think that segment is really good at telling the story of the individual, but that we need to get better as an industry of telling the story of the group because obviously, like just for a narrative perspective, and especially like when you're communicating with cultures like a lot of importing countries have, like the US and Europe, it's very individualistic. And so people
Yeah.
really like, they connect more with the story of one singular person. And also, it just sort of marries really well with traceability, where it's like, okay, this coffee comes from this one family or this one farm, and like, here's the details about it. But you and I know that a lot of the transformative change that can come in coffee comes from buying really great community lots and working with larger communities. And a lot of the places that coffee comes from have a more communal culture, and they may want to be portrayed in a more communal way,
Yeah.
and uh, so yeah, I think that is something that just like in general we need to get better at dealing with. I think that in the last 5 years or so, especially, like so many people in the coffee supply chain have been focusing so much on gathering a lot of data, Caravella included, and you've been doing it for much longer than that. And so I think it's going to be interesting. I think that is a really helpful like data and data analytics tools, and also like kind of interesting pieces of technology are really helpful for gathering that type of information from a large group and kind of like seeing patterns and seeing what like how to convey the personality of the community or of the, it's a very technical way to put it, but like sort of like the organism, like when you're in a
Yeah.
relationship with another person, like you have the two individuals and then you have like the unit that they make together. It's like a third entity.
Yeah.
And like that's how I think that there's that kind of you know mm, personality to be portrayed with groups
Yeah.
of producers as well. So yeah, and I mean the way that I kind of came to that mostly was more from my studies in university, just coming from an economics and econometrics background, where you're used to looking at these huge sample sizes of in fact, like you have to look at huge sample sizes of people, and in order to sort of make any kind of conclusions or assumptions about their behaviors. And like, it's just worth like looking at being able to handle a larger scale of information about people in order to see what's happening on a bigger level. So
yeah, where are the trends? Like what are we not seeing and therefore not analyzing or taking into account?
right.
Yeah, that's very important. I think that I agree. I think that's one of those topics that are often overlooked because there's no background on how communities work, or very a close relationship or being able to see how communities work, because this is not only about the agronomic products that they deliver or produce, but it's the whole structure of the community. Who is in charge? Who is the one that speaks? Who is the one that connects people? And there are many jobs within a community. So seeing and understanding that in many regions, or in many countries, coffee comes more from communities, and purchasing from communities or communal blends is actually more supportive to the producers than purchasing just from one, because your impact instantly increases. You are being part of the change and the support that's allowing producers to improve. And if they improve any others in the communal group, the economic flow will move in the same community. So their quality of life will improve easily. So it's something that's probably not being going to be perceived the first year, but you would easily see it within 3 to 5 years. A big change in producers that are part of a specific project, and producers that are just selling coffee by themselves.
Yeah, and I think the way that I've done this in the past, and the way that a lot of specialty roasters do it well, which is what I really like, is just, you buy several different qualities from a certain community. You can do the communal blends, and also it has more sustainability for a roaster that's like above a very small level, because once you get past like a certain benchmark, like you just have to work with communal lots if you want to have any consistency, at least for some of your offerings, because if you want to work with small producers on a lot that's like 50 bags in Oaxaca and Mexico, those producers are really small, and it's pretty unlikely that those small producers are going to be able to offer you very unlikely.
That's not happening.
But yeah, so what a lot of people will do is just have sort of like several different offerings, like unified by one project, and they'll offer like a community blend that maybe goes towards something that's a little bit more functional, a little more approachable, and then also offer isolated micro lots that are from a specific group of families or a specific producer. And that's how I like to do it too. It's nothing really crazy or secretive. It's just sort of like about concentrating your buying a little bit more in buying different types of qualities from one community if you can.
Now that you're talking about buying and purchasing coffee, why don't you tell us a little bit about the responsibilities that a green coffee buyer should have? We know that green coffee buyers have different responsibilities and job descriptions through different companies, but in general, as a consultant, which would you say are the most important responsibilities a green coffee should have, and which responsibility is the most overlooked one?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that the biggest weight that you carry as a green coffee buyer for a roaster, at least, and for an importer on different levels too, is about controlling the narrative, because you are essentially you're the link, you're the translation of the information from the supply side to the demand side, and so you yeah, you really do. A lot of times that's the person who controls the story that's told about where the coffee comes from and, you know, where it's going, like in terms of like what we think about how this coffee tastes and like where we think it's suited
Yeah.
for, you know. So I think it's worth being, you know, just super cognizant about that. So when you control the narrative, it means it's really important for you to kind of take a more journalistic and a bit more formalized approach to the way that you're communicating information. So just on a very basic level, you know, I always tell people this, like, just fact check your information as much as you can. You know, you don't always have the possibility to just WhatsApp the farmer or farmers and be like, hey, is this right? But, you know, as much as you can, like, if you are going to print it, like, imagine that the people who grew it are going to read it and be like, that's not right, or, you know, oh, that's really good. And so it makes me really happy when I get feedback from different people in the supply chain of like, you told that story really well, or like you took that complicated information and made it a lot more digestible and like easy to perceive. Like that is, I consider that to be like the highest compliment.
Yeah.
But yeah, and also like if you're not sure that a particular fact is right and you just feel like you don't have enough information to communicate with your customers about the coffee, remember that like you are also a piece of the supply chain. So, you know, if the story of the coffee is just that you like the way it tastes, or that you just think it's really, really good, or that you really like the importer that sold it to you, then like you can tell that story too. And be, you know, come at it with a little bit more clarity and enthusiasm because it's based on something that is a little bit more rooted in reality, you know? So yeah, I think that's important. And also, you know, you are probably the closest person who deals with the green that knows what your customers want. Like you know, are again in that position of sort of translation. So be sure that your story represents the rest of the supply chain in a way that they endorse, or in a way that, you know, characterizes them in a way that they would want to be characterized. Like, for example, you know, um, I can't think of a very specific example of someone doing this, but you know, it's never a great approach to, you know, kind of paint the picture of like, oh, you know, these growers are need to be the subject of your pity, and that's why you should buy the coffee.
Yeah.
You know, but yeah, you know, I mean, somebody was talking about you, and you're not the same person as they are, but like, you know, just come at it with some respect from that perspective, you know, and fact check as much as you can. And then I guess another question you asked me was, what do I think is the most overlooked job of a green
Yeah.
buyer? And I think something that people forget to do or don't know that they can do is just to give feedback after
Which
they're
is very
done.
important.
Yeah, after they're done working with a green coffee, because especially if you are a small to medium scale specialty roaster, um, like uh, like Merit or Square Mile, small to medium large, then you end up having this your roasting team and your quality control team end up having like this very intimate relationship with the coffee that almost no one else in the supply chain really gets to have, especially if it's a community blend or something like that, because you're really the only one who gets to experience it and in so much depth as a finished, or like as a finished combined product. So like, you know, your the challenges that you face with it, like, you know, things you find in it, how Quakery it is, or just like, you know, your understanding of how consistent the coffee is, or just like how much you enjoyed it, or if your customers really liked it, if it exceeded your expectations, then like that, you know, you don't have to be able to like advise on like, okay, like as an exporter, as a grower, like this is what I think you should do based on what I saw. But like, you know, you might be surprised that just like, you know, you as a roaster can get information about farming and think it's interesting, even though you're not an expert, like producers and other people along the supply chain, like are you know, especially the good ones, are like interested in what you're doing with the coffee and how you see it. You know, it helps them understand you as a customer and what you're looking for, but it also like they, especially in the different, you know, the people in the supply chain who really just see like the big aggregates, you know, like the people who will cup through like just the finished like the pre-chip sample of a full community blend, they're definitely not seeing it in the same level of detail that a roaster is. So like knowing, having information about like how that coffee performed and what, you know, how it was on such a granular level is really, really helpful for them. And it can really make a difference in the quality of the
It
coffee.
does.
Hmm. Yeah.
It does. The difference is huge. Even like if you're an importer, exporter, especially exporter and producer, you're curious about how they're going to use the coffee. How did they roast it? Did it last? Was it successful
Yeah,
amongst
longevity.
customers?
Longevity is a big one to give feedback about too, because a lot of times I'm learning more and more, like, obviously, you know, I think we as an industry always used to focus on seasonality because it was the only way to guarantee, you know,
Yeah.
uh, like if a coffee's being used immediately after it lands, you don't have to worry about longevity. But the more that people who are producing and milling coffee and drying coffee learn about good practices, the longer and longer the coffee lasts. And personally, like, I don't care if a coffee is fresh off the boat, if it tastes like it's fresh off the boat, you know? I just want to try to buy from that farmer every year. So if I can use their coffee for longer, I can buy more.
Yeah, that's very, very important for producers and exporters to actually have the data because it's like in my experience, it's something I don't come across often. And we're always trying to figure out and build like reports or like, okay, this customer like this profile and this coffee, and it turned out to sell really well. So next year, when I'm seeing coffee from the same group of producers or the same producer, I will instantly think of the roaster or the person who purchased the coffee, and I will start separating it. I'm early on talking to the producer and saying, okay, we're going to do this. Like, we have the opportunity to purchase more coffee from you. We can like improve here and there to have the coffee ready and to offer a lot that's like it's providing information so producers and roasters will have certainty on what they're going to sell and purchase, especially. And that takes a lot of work.
Yeah, it is
Oh
a lot
wait,
of
that's
work.
highly appreciated.
So I have a question for you. So for me, I feel like the appropriate time to give that feedback is either at the very end of when you're using all of the copies from that project, and or about a month before the harvest starts again. Um, I like to do it like, I like to be thinking about it while I'm using the coffee so that it's fresh in
Yeah,
my mind. But I don't know, what would you agree that that's the right timeline, or would you just say anything at
I
all,
would.
really?
Yeah, I would agree that that is the right time. Like when you're using the coffee. So you receive the coffee, we receive your notes because you're accepting the coffee, and that's great. But having information while you're roasting batch after batch after batch, then we will have consistency and we will have shelf life of the coffee, and that is very important for us, especially because we will start working with that information with producers early on. So it's something, if there is a problem or if there is like any bad feedback, we can mitigate it. But if there is really good feedback, we can use it for the producers to be happy and ready for next harvest and to be extra careful. So it's the perfect time.
Yeah, and a good way too to do that, if you are a roaster or a quality control person and you're just trying to figure out like how to organize your information, if you use Cropster or some type of other cupping database or whatever, like what I like to do is when I notice the coffee, I have kind of like, and it could be whatever, like you can have your own internal system, but like
Excellent.
I like to just like, especially for longevity, like if I notice the coffee kind of turning, I have like partial age or age, and I just use them as tags, like tasting notes. And that way it's really easy for me to sort all of my QC responses and figure out exactly when I started seeing that and how common it was. Or like for things like defects, you know, just like make it easier for yourself where like you score your production QC batches a specific way if you get a defect, so that it's really easy for you to sort it at the end of the coffee's life cycle and just be like, oh, we had out of, you know, whatever 100 batches, we had, you know, 15 that had this defect, and then you can kind of give some type of idea of how common that was, you know. And that just makes it like quicker and smoother and easier to incorporate in your workflow, because it can be really difficult if you don't have like a system to really like go back and see like, oh, like this is sort of what we got. Another sort of more like qualitative way to do it is just to like have a little recap on especially like the larger purchases that you do with your team. Like when you finish, you know, say you bought, you know, a lot that you use for like 3 months or something like that, then, you know, just check in with the core people that are on your team, maybe the roasters, if you have cafe staff, that can be helpful, some of the management, and just be like, hey, what did you guys think of this coffee? And like, what was your feedback? And just see what happens, and just like kind of gather that and keep it together, you know? It's almost like cupping notes plus, because people's impressions of it are also really important. It's going to affect how people see it the coming year.
Yeah. And it will, in my opinion, it will help the people that's providing the coffee, but it will also help the people who's selling the coffee.
Yeah.
Because then you have idea on how people receive the coffee. Where was it better? Like, was people actually engaged with the coffee, or it was just because of the season or something like that?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Huh. So with all of these learnings and points in mind, what would you teach the new people in coffee as the most important subject they need to pay attention to?
I would say
we all want to learn, so
yeah, definitely. I'd say like keep an open mind. Like I feel like especially when I meet people who are new to the industry and are really hungry to learn, sometimes out of insecurity they can cling to what they think are like the rules of what they need to do, or like, you know, like these are the areas that produce good coffee and these are the areas that produce bad coffee, or something like that, you know, or like these are the processes that are good and these are the ones that are bad, you know. And you know, I think I see that less and less, but it's just always important. And I have to tell myself this too, just like to kind of like let go of your dogma and just like try new stuff and keep an open mind, because also it's like, you know, the norms change all the time. Like that's something that I love about working in coffee, is that especially your expectations about coffee origins change all the time, and it's just going to happen faster and faster with climate change. So like it would behoove you to keep an open mind about what is good in coffee and what is workable, you know?
yeah, definitely. I think that's one of the most important things, because keeping an open mind and observe, trying to analyze what's happening, what are the trends, and trying to think and question why will only bring better foundation for you as a coffee person or a professional in the industry to decide your opinion on something. And if you have an opinion on something, how are you going to purchase coffee, for example, or how are you going to sell the coffee? So that's very important.
Yeah.
And now that we're talking about this, and probably we have people that's already a green coffee buyer or is questioning how to be a green coffee buyer, how would you describe the power that a green coffee buyer has?
Well, I mean, just to kind of, I won't dwell on it too much because I feel like I already said a lot before, but just to kind of echo on, you know, that like I really feel like controlling the narrative is the power of the green coffee buyer. And so the more and more that we can find ways to, you know, to share that and to be more thoughtful about that, the better that we will become as a discipline, as a career path.
And what would you say is the most common mistake that you have seen with green coffee buyers?
I say this all the time, but just overbuying. Like, I feel like everyone.
Do your numbers.
Yeah. Well, you know, nobody can predict the future, but I think, like, especially if you are just starting out and you have a small operation, like, you know, be conservative in your purchases, because also, right, you know, now if your objective is just to buy really tasty coffee, you have so many more options to be able to do that quickly in a spot environment if you need something immediately. So you have room to grow. So like that did not used to be the case, you know, and definitely I would encourage people in the long term to try to move towards working with the same people over and over again at Origin. But like you, the health of your business and the reputation of your coffee for being fresh, for people's appetite for it is like really you know, it's really important for the health of your business, and like that is what creates your value in the supply chain, like is being a good roaster or being a good provider of roasted coffee. Like, you know, when you overbuy, here's what happens. Like, so, because this is usually how it happens. And I'm sorry, Salomé, you've heard me say this so many times, but I just think it's really relevant. Yeah, so no, I think when you overbuy, here's what happens. And this is how it usually happens is, you know, small scale coffee roaster, you know, visits a really cool, or big scale, you know, visits a really cool project at Origin. And with the best intentions, they're like, I love working with this person or this group of people. I really want to support this project. And you know, I'm going to take a big risk and buy more coffee than I really need from this project because I want to make a commitment to them, you know? And, you know, what often ends up happening is like, you know, when the coffee arrives at your roastery, you end up having it around for too long. So, you know, you may not be displaying it at its best quality. And also like I mean, it depends on your clientele, but like your staff and your clientele, you know, will kind of get a little tired of it. Like it's always good to start small on a project, even though you might want like with all of your heart to be like, I want to buy as much coffee as I possibly can from this project. Like the way that you can be a good partner is to be dependable. You know what I mean? Because especially like what really small producers face is just a huge amount of risk. So the less risk that you can present, and the more you can kind of represent like a steadily growing relationship, like that makes you a better partner. So yeah, don't overbuy, like, you know, let things grow at a longer pace than you might want to.
That's great advice. That's great advice. And I think the healthiest advice possible. Grow with your supply chain as well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you for your time. And for the inspiring words. It's very interesting to hear from your point of view and your perspective, your experience. I only have one or two more questions.
Okay.
So people can learn more from you. Would you share a lesson you have learned and your most inspiring moments in coffee?
I would say a lesson I've learned in particular about when I'm
Don't
traveling.
overbook.
Well, yeah, that's like you know, that's an easy one, but like in general, like when I'm traveling at Origin, it's more about the questions I didn't know I need to ask versus like the laundry list of questions that I might ask about what's going on. Like, I think it's really important when you're, you know, going to some of these places where coffee grows, if you don't, you know, even if you do come from a place where coffee grows, if you're just visiting a new place in general, like sometimes, you know, like you should communicate your needs and then just stop and just listen and just like see what information pops out and how it informs you, you know? because you like every time, like the value of traveling for me is not about like, okay, collecting all of the things, because I have to have a good relationship, a good communication with people who are on the ground all the time anyway, or else this isn't going to work. When I'm there, it's about, you know yeah, it's just about soaking up the things that people didn't even know they needed to explain to me, because of our, like, the chasm of cultural context that is in between us. So, you know, say what you need and then shut up.
Sure. Yeah. Let the experience bring the questions.
Absolutely. Also, I'd say, like a way that I personally try to deal with the very colonial nature of the coffee supply chain is to try to approach it like it's a seller's market, and producers and supply chain partners need to pick me. Like, I need to be on my best behavior for them and offer the most to them, versus how, unfortunately is where the balance of power is very much in the buyer's court. Like, in some ways it's great for me because obviously I'm a buyer, like it gives me a lot of flexibility to do the things I need to do. But I think a big part of like dealing with that imbalance of power is to at least try to suspend your disbelief for a minute and just imagine that it's the producers who have all of the choice in the world for who to work with, and you need to be the best partner that they can choose.
That's great. That's, yeah, I think that most of the people in the industry should see the process like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of, I don't know, it's the way I try to deal with it. So.
Oh, I think it's very impressive. Like, it's the first person I have heard saying something like that, and I think it makes a lot of sense because of colonialism and because buyer sellers, basically. You can shift the balance and the power so you can bring more equity. And that's very, very important.
Well, yeah, because a lot of times, I mean, I would challenge producers to think that way as well, but that's not necessarily, I can't really be asking more of them in most cases. And so it's like, I want to live in a world where the producer has their choice to work with who they want to work with, and they can be more picky about like how their coffee is presented and that sort of thing. And that's not quite the world that we live in right now, but it would make me really it makes me really happy when producers question me about how I present their coffee, or like have like they feel comfortable to ask me difficult questions, because I want to be able to have those kinds of conversations, and I want to be able to like compete for their attention and their time and their coffee, I guess. So
yeah.
And
what about your most inspiring moment?
Yeah, so I love when, and there's one particular farmer that I'm thinking of, but I love when I buy coffee from, like, when I used to work at Merit, so they're a roaster retailer, so the coffee, I would get to see the coffee all the way from the producer in some cases to, it being served in our cafes. Because when I'm in Austin, I'll just, I would just hang out in our cafes and watch people buy the different offerings. And so one of my most inspiring things was working with a really small farmer who had never exported her coffee and bringing it in, and then we named the coffee after her, and just hearing people, just customers, who will never ever meet her, like coming into the shop and being like, oh, I want that, I want her coffee, and like saying her name again and again and again and being like, oh, like that, coffee is really good, and like that's the one that I want. And like that, like I never get tired of that. I can like text them or pass the message along the supply chain of like, people are asking for your coffee by name, by your name, like that's super cool to me. And I think it's really, really neat. And it's just like also, like obviously it's great to be able to pay a higher price for the coffee and to participate in something that's as traceable as that. But like, also it's just like a cool thing for that person. Like, it's so neat to see your work, you know, being enjoyed by somebody on the other side of the planet, you know, like it's neat. It has a really cool, just a cool factor, you know, beyond like
Yeah,
the
it
basic
definitely is.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. That I think that's one of the moments where you feel more like rewarded and happy for like the job that you're doing, but more than anything, because the job the producer is doing is being respected, and that's not something we come along as often. So, Jamie, thank you for joining us, for taking the time, and for answering our questions, for inspiring people to get into coffee with a different perspective. Is there anything else you want to add, or you would like to advise the people that's watching us?
Sometimes it's important just to make time to just like enjoy a cup of coffee and not think about it. I do it every day, and
Yeah,
it keeps it fun for me. So do that.
the only way to maintain surprising us.
Totally, yeah. Anyway, well, it was really nice talking to you, Salomé. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it was a pleasure. Thank you for taking the time.
Cool.
Thanks for watching Carabela Coffee Talks.
And stay tuned for next episodes coming up in the next few weeks.
We will continue featuring incredible women leaders that play important roles in the coffee industry, such as roasters, agronomists, researchers, green coffee buyers, coffee producers, and leaders of powerful organizations.
In future episodes, we will talk about setting up successful coffee businesses, growing in coffee, the evolution and development of different coffee scenes and geographies, science, cupping, the force of good, coffee production, among other relevant topics that are changing the status quo to make coffee better.
To learn more about the coffee professionals behind each talk, visit our website and subscribe to our podcast on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or YouTube channel. See you next time.